Manitoba, the home of facilitator, the other things with or of Notinhalloffame.com, the fictitious athlete Hall-of-Fame.com, the fictitious Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and the United States Athletic Hall of Fame. And tonight, we are looking at the running backs who could become part of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Now, usually I'm sort of the quarterback of everything that we do here, but you know what? A great quarterback knows when to hand it off. And I am handing it off today. I am passing the Dutchie on the left-hand side to the Schlegel daddy. You know him, you love him. It's Jeff. Jeff, you are going to quarterback all of this. We are going to talk about running backs, all those who could be eligible or should be on the next ballot for the modern ballot. Take it away, Jeff.
Yes, thank you. How do I follow that, huh? That was a Canadian greeting, the likes of which I don't even feel like I earned. But yes, thank you to everybody that may be watching us now. Thank you to everybody that joined us, our very distinguished panel for today. This is kind of a germinative idea that came up over the past couple of days. We're in that dead period of where we're waiting for the NFL to get back into the flow, right? We're getting kind of the itch again, like fiending to sit there and talk about the Hall of Fame. And, as we were thinking about, we're waiting for the senior pool and those nominees, I think, to be announced any day now. It's like, well, let's think a little bit about the Hall of Fame. And we were really looking at some of the positions, started talking about running backs and how there's kind of like this big group of running backs. And how do we feel that we could separate them? How could the voters potentially look at separating them, trying to define who does really belong in Canton and maybe who just kind of misses the cut. So that's what we're here to do today. Is we've got 10 running backs that we're going to cover. We're going to go through and do about 2 to 3 minute presentation on each of them to kind of set that baseline standard. And then it's going to be open floor, and we'll start talking about the different candidates, comparing and contrasting their resumes. I think as we go through, we'll try and do a couple of votes and really trying to establish some type of tiers. I'm going to kick it over to Jack for just a moment to see if he has anything else he wants to throw out there. Maybe he wants to acknowledge some of the other running backs that we're not going to talk about today, because there are a number of good players that we're not going to hit on this time.
Yeah, so there are a number of good players, a number of running backs who are not in this conversation, which we're keeping to 10. Among those not in the conversation, let's see, Matt Forte, 15,000 yards from scrimmage, 75 total touchdowns. Thomas Jones, obviously we all know how Jeff and I feel about Thomas Jones, Bears fans, and how all Bears fans feel about the possibility that a little bit of a twist in history and he's a Super Bowl MVP and a lifelong Bear. We've got Clinton Portis, who we talked a lot about, 3 1,500-yard seasons, 9 seasons, and went for over 1,006 of them. Just under 10,000 yards and 4 seasons with 10 plus touchdowns. Who else am I missing, guys? Anybody can just throw in, Jeff.
Brian Westbrook, Warwick Dunn. We didn't even get to the fullbacks. I got to imagine you've got a 30-second plug for Lorenzo Neal, Jack. I just got to imagine you.
No, we can keep it to running backs. The case of Lorenzo Neal is so strong, airtight, and obvious to all who see it that I don't even have to spend any time talking about Mike Allstott's lead blocker.
But in all seriousness, Jack, you hit on something key there, right? There's a lot of really good players, right? These are guys that have decent resumes, but not everybody's going to end up in Canton. Not everybody.
Yeah, we're not even talking about sort of recent seniors in Roger Craig and Otis Anderson. We're not talking about guys who are retired but not yet eligible. So LaShawn McCoy and Marshawn Lynch. Obviously, we're not talking about anybody active. Derrick Henry already has 80 plus touchdowns. I've been like neck deep in running backs the last 2 days.
Right.
Derrick Henry went for 2,000 yards in an era where people don't run like that. And we're not talking about Adrian Peterson, who we all know is a different level here. And we're not talking about Frank Gore, who achieved something that's kind of on a different level and distinguished himself where everybody is aware of like what the conversation is about Frank Gore with the 10 running backs that we're looking at, it's a situation where there isn't a lot of awareness or agreement on how to measure all these guys against each other. The voters have chosen Fred Taylor. They put him out ahead. He's a 4-time semifinalist. And Ricky Waters has made 3, and Eddie George has made 1. And of the group that we're talking about, that's it. Everybody else is hasn't yet, common nominee hasn't yet made the semifinals, and there's reasons for that because you can't really line up one resume to another because they all have very different strengths and weaknesses, and that's what we're going to discuss and sort out.
And on that note, because I'm excited as hell to talk about this, frankly, as Jack referenced, we're going to be talking about 10 guys today. I'm going to do a quick list off of them. Sean Alexander, Tiki Barber, Corey Dillon, Eddie George, Priest Holmes, Steven Jackson, Thomas Jones, Jamal Lewis, Fred Taylor, and the aforementioned Ricky Waters. Those are going to be the 10. We're going to get ready to dive in here in a moment. And like I said, it's going to be about 2 to 3 minutes per presentation where everyone's going to present the initial best case for the resume for these candidates, and we will go from there. And I'm just going to keep it in alphabetical order by last name of the candidate. I'm going to kick it over to Jack first to talk about Sean Alexander.
Thank you. Sean Alexander, favorite of mine. I really enjoyed the battles that the Bears had with him. I think that's kind of probably what endeared me to him and to his career. I would absolutely make the case for Sean Alexander. What's interesting is that our committee has already made the case for Sean Alexander. He is the only running back we've elected to the semis in our 3 years as a committee. We've done so 3 years in a row. So I think we all feel pretty good about Sean Alexander. He is one of those, low numbers in some area, high numbers in other areas, because career not as long as maybe we remember. Incredible 5-year peak. As I always say, he won an MVP when LaDainian Tomlinson was at his best. Offensive Player of the Year, single season touchdown record, best player on the best non-offensive lineman on the offense of the 2005 Seahawks, and just kind of a battering ram heart. Just you picture that body just pounding people, and then that breakaway speed. Has the rushing title, and the number that jumps out, two numbers jump out. One is that he's one of the few guys, maybe the only guy one of 2 guys we're going to talk about tonight that is not in the 10,000 yard club, but 100 rushing touchdowns, 112 touchdowns overall in 123 games, 96 starts, 112 touchdowns and 96 starts. So as I look at all these guys and I look at what jumps off the page, there are going to be certain elements for some and others. And that's a number, 100 rushing touchdowns, 112 touchdowns, considering his games, that jumps off the page.
Thank you, Jack. Well done, sir. Next up, we're going to go to Vinny, who's going to talk about the guy in his background, Tiki Barber. Vinny, the floor is yours, sir.
Okay. Now, everyone and their mother knows how much of a man crush I have on Matt Ryan. But what if I told you that there was someone I had a man crush on when I was much younger? That guy right behind me, Tiki Barber. He's the person that when I was younger, he had his books that he's made, his kids' books that he made with his brother Rondé. And I would go to Huntington, the book review, in a long line, get my pictures with him, and had many of his signatures done. I don't know where books are right now, but I have his signature and some photos I had with me when I was a young lad, one could say. Now, why do I like Tiki Barber, and why do I feel, even after all these years, he still has a very strong Hall of Fame case, at least in my opinion? Well, Tiki Barber was someone who, throughout his 10 years with the Giants, was their bell cow back, and was someone who got better as time went on. Earlier on, he had somewhat of a fumbling issue in the league, in the middle point, during the Giants run against the Ravens, and then just before Coughlin came, he had a total of I think it was 20 around the time, around the 20s. But then, and he still had a really quality career at that point. But once Coughlin came in, and just a little bit beforehand, he started getting better and better. And then his last 3 seasons, he was a Pro Bowl all 3 times, was an All Pro in 2005, led the league in not even led the league. He had his best in 2005, where he was a first team All Pro. And even in his final season in the league, which was 2006, he had 1,600 rushing yards as well as 5 touchdowns. So not bad for a final year. The reason why he decided to leave is because of the toll that the running back position was taking on his body. He wanted to take a broadcast position, which he finally has the job with Evan Roberts on WFAN, and he's had many broadcasting stints with CBS and NBC and here and whatnot. But the reason why I feel a lot of people turn off with Tiki Barber was because he kind of badmouthed Eli Manning and Tom Coughlin after he left, and the Giants went on to win the Super Bowl the following year without him. Saying, "See, we didn't truly need him after all. We had Ahmad Bradshaw, we had all these other guys that came in for your role. We didn't need you after all, Tiki." But the funny thing is, even when Tiki Barber retired, like he was still very dominant. He finished with 10,449 rushing yards, and if you were to look at his numbers in terms of total rushing average, you look at the rushing yards leaders for every player with at least 10,000 or more rushing yards. You'll get the you look at the highest averages with 10,000 more yards. Jim Brown has the most, obviously, with 5.2. Barry Sanders, 5.0. And then you have OJ Simpson and Tiki Barber with 4.7 for average. Just below him at 4.6, you have Adrian Peterson and the aforementioned Red Taylor of 4.6. And you have LaShawn McCoy of 4.5, Walter Payton 4.4, Eric Dickerson 4.4, Frank Gore 4.3, Tony Dorsett, Marshall Faulk, Corey Dillon also have that. And then afterwards, you have Jamal Lewis and Marshawn Lynch have 4.2. So Tiki Barber has a higher average per season than guys that are already in Canton, and some guys that some people already see as first ballot Hall of Famers, or in the case of like Fred Taylor, for instance, going to be Hall of Famers. So because of that, the high average, and despite being somewhat of a shorter career compared to some other backs, I still think it's quite sweet. So yeah, that's my case for Tiki Barber. I listed even some reasons why he's not, but hey, it's not bad to throw a couple of ideas as to why I think he should be in.
Thank you for that, Vinny. Good repping
Anytime,
on Tiki
Jeffrey.
there. Next up, we're going to go to the man himself, the man of Manitoba, Kirk. And he's going to talk about Corey Dillon.
Yeah, I'm going to take a different approach here. I'm going to be blunt, guys. Corey Dillon is not necessarily someone who I always think of with the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I love that he's a preliminary candidate, but I just want to lay everything out here. So I'm going to take a different approach, and maybe we can sort of like all look at him a little bit in a different light, because that's sort of what I did. Guys, correct me if I'm wrong. I know I might have created our chat group in Twitter, but I'm not the most active person on that. I don't know if Corey Dillon's remarks a few days ago is sort of what sparked this. And for those who are just sort of like wondering what those remarks were, Corey Dillon had a conversation with The Atlantic, which is interesting because I thought The Atlantic fired all the sports writers, but apparently they didn't. That conversation included Corey Dillon saying that he thinks he should be a Pro Football Hall of Famer. Most people didn't key in on that, but he was mostly dumping on the Cincinnati Bengals Ring of Honor. Vinny, you and I talked about that. We were going back and forth on our Twitter DMs on that. And we both sort of agree that he should. So I went in a deeper dive in Corey Dillon. Then I'm trying to compare him in my mind to Fred Taylor, who I will be discussed a little bit later. So I looked at we know that Corey Dillon's got the numbers, 6,000 plus yards. He actually is the record holder in New England seasons, single season rushing yards, which is fascinating to me that it's Corey Dillon. But who did he have around him? Not a whole hell of a lot. Now, Jeff, our fine host here, has done a fantastic job sort of debunking how Willie Anderson may not be a Pro Football Hall of Famer, but it's sort of believed that that would be the best teammate that he had. So let's say that it is. There was no other offensive lineman that was even remotely average that he had. His quarterbacks were the ghost of Neil O'Donnell, what was left of Boomer Esiason, John Kitna, and if you've heard what he said was basically, John Kitna's going to get into this motherfucker before I am. Direct quote, that's what he did say in regards to the Bengals Ring of Honor. And his best wide receiver eventually was Chad Ochocinco or Chad Johnson, but that wasn't until later on. What would he have done if he had what Curtis Martin had around him? Others had around him. Yeah, he wanted out. Yeah, because there was nothing there. He was right to want out of Cincinnati, and he won a championship because of what he wanted to do. Is Corey Dillon a victim of circumstance? Was Corey Dillon the best player on his team for at least 5 years? Yeah, he was. I don't think that's really in dispute. Is it his fault that he couldn't take them to a winning record? You can only carry so much. Corey Dillon would probably have 3,000 more yards, rushing yards, in a different circumstance. There's no doubt in my mind of that. Is Corey Dillon a Pro Football Hall of Famer? And I know I'm supposed to say why he is, and I don't know that he is. I'll be blunt here, but I think he's a lot better, and he deserves a lot better than what his actual numbers say. So I want to put that out. And if we're looking at Fred Taylor, who never won anything, could Corey Dillon not be in that same spot? He could, and I think better. That's my take. Also, he's a champion.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Kirk. Unique spin on it, but hey, that's part of the purpose of the exercise right here is to try and help us kind of sort through this list. So next up, we're going to go to Shravan, who's going to present Eddie George. You got about 3 minutes, sir. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jeff. Normally, when it comes to the Music City, we think about the days of Earl Campbell with the Houston Oilers. We have Derrick Henry now running well with the Tennessee Titans. Chris Johnson had the magical 2,000-yard season, but one name that often goes underappreciated is Eddie George. Drafted out of Ohio State in the late 90s, he burst onto the scene as a Rookie of the Year in 1996 and is one of very few running backs with over 10,000 rushing yards in a single spot, 10,009 with the Houston Oilers / Tennessee Titans. A key member of the 1999 AFC champions, George had a phenomenal Super Bowl game, although the Titans came up 1 yard short against the greatest show on turf. His best season was in 2000, 1,509 rushing yards as the Titans won the division and advanced to the divisional round game where they met the Baltimore Ravens, who were led by arguably the greatest single-season defense in NFL history. The Titans fell short 24-10. The Titans would go to the AFC Championship game again in 2002, where they lost to Rich Gannon and the Oakland Raiders, who went on to lose to Tampa Bay in the Super Bowl. But Eddie George had a lot to do with those years, even during the 2003 season when the Titans went to the divisional round and lost to Tom Brady and the Patriots in one of the coldest games in Foxborough history. But we look at Eddie George's records. He never missed a game during his time in Tennessee and Houston. He had 4 Pro Bowls, 36 to 100-plus yards games, and the Titans were 30-6. Keep in mind, the Tennessee Titans had nobody really on the offensive side of the ball that was a big name. They had some good linemen, but not in terms of weapons. That was going up against Pittsburgh, Jacksonville, and Baltimore. The Steelers' defense had a top 10 defense 4 times. Baltimore had 3, Jacksonville had 2. This was back when Tom Coughlin was running the show as an expansion team. He had over 1,300 yards 4 times in his career, over 12,600 all-purpose yards, top 10 in rushing attempts during his career, 7 times, top 5 in rushing yards over on a 5-year span, 68 rushing touchdowns, 78 total scores. In 9 playoff games, the man went over 750 rushing yards, 5 rushing touchdowns, and was also versatile as a pass catcher. The yards from scrimmage, 4 times he led the league. Led the league in touchdown runs, 3 times. Rushing yards per game, top 10 4 times. Rushing touchdowns in a season, 4 times in the top 10. The man's average yards per season was 7th overall when you think about the NFL's all-time rushers. They're ahead of 5 running backs that are currently in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. That's remarkable. Granted, that was a time where running the football was still the creme de la creme compared to the passing attack that we see right now as part of the 21st century. But Eddie George goes unnoticed because the Titans weren't exactly a household name, though they had several key players that are worthy of getting their credit. The late, great Steve McNair, Javon Curse on the defensive side of the ball, Blaine Bishop, one of the hardest hitters that the league has ever seen. So in conclusion, I don't know if Eddie George will ever get the call, but if I was a voter and I'm putting my money on him to get in, I have a fair chance of winning that bet. And oh, by the way, for any running back fans out here, particularly Bears fans, this is your list because your franchise loves them running backs. You will vouch for running backs every chance you get. You'll even vouch for Jeremy Langford for all I care. But at this point in time, Titans fans, I hear your pleas. Eddie George was not just a great Buckeye. He was also a fabulous Oiler and a Titan and should be recognized in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, considering the music in the Music City was never the same when he left until they got Calvin Johnson. And that was a long time coming. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robin. Next up, it's time to hear about Priest Holmes. I almost said Chris Holmes. I'm sorry. Priest Holmes. How dare I say that? Chris, the mic is yours. 3 minutes.
All right, thanks.
You're up.
All right, thanks, Jeff. Yep, so I got Priest Holmes here. Most of us remember him as a Kansas City running back, but he actually started his career in 1997 as an undrafted free agent, making the Baltimore Ravens as their 4th string running back. So his career really got off to kind of a slow start from where he ended up. Spent 4 seasons with Baltimore, was a member of their 2000 or Super Bowl 35 winning team. It was in 2001 when he moved over to Kansas City that his career really took off. For 3.5 seasons, he was arguably the best running back in the NFL and possibly the best player in the league at that time. In 2001, he led the league in rushing yards and total yards from scrimmage. 2002, he led the league in rushing touchdowns and yards from scrimmage. 2003, he had set at the time the record for most rushing touchdowns in a season with 27, later broken by Shaun Alexander. And in 2004, he was actually on his way to what could have been his best season ever. He was on pace for 1,800 yards until a knee injury took him down. Ended his season after 8 games. Made it back in 2005. Just really wasn't the same player he was prior to the knee injury, though. Still put up some decent numbers, but it was in 2005 when a back injury actually pretty much ended his career then. He pushed through, missed all of the rest of the 2005 season, missed all of 2006, finally made it back in 2007, just played in a couple games though, 4 games, and then another back injury more or less ended his, not more or less, it ended his career. He decided to call it a career there. So he didn't end up with the long career or the big numbers that he may have had he not had that knee injury in 2004. I mean, he was on pace for 1,800 yards. Who knows? Maybe he could have ended up with 2,000 with a couple of breaks there and towards the end of the season. But he did end up with over 8,000 rushing yards, over 11,000 yards from scrimmage. He scored 94 total touchdowns in only 82 starts. And you take out that first season with the Ravens where he was a rookie and only played in a few games, missed the 2006 season, really missed the 2007 season. And you just kind of focus on those Kansas City years where he was at his peak. And that peak there, I don't know if it's enough to push him into the conversation for a Hall of Fame spot. But like I said, he was probably arguably the best running back at that time there. And it really would have been something to see what he could have done had he not had that knee injury. But I think at the end, he, unfortunately, as much as I'd like to see him enshrined in Canton, I think he just does come up short. But those 3.5 years back in 2001 to 2004, they were some of the best that any running backs really had in their career. So that's what I have tonight for Priest Holmes.
Thank you very much, Chris. Yeah, one of the great woulda, couldas, right? Like some
Absolutely.
really great seasons, man. I tell
Yeah.
you, I feel you all the way. Next up, we're going to kick it over to Paul, who's going to present the case for Steven Jackson. The floor is
All right,
yours.
thanks. And like my fellow Canadian Kurt, I'm going to take a little bit different spin on things here. So my question is, if Fred Taylor, who's been, as we mentioned, has been a semifinalist, why has Steven Jackson not been? Why isn't he getting any consideration? I'm not actually going to make an argument here. I don't think he's probably not the best player or candidate or running back among the group we're going to look at. But I'm asking the question, why is he not getting any attention by the voters? So let's just do a quick side-by-side comparison. I'm going to handle this way. So Steven Jackson, just quickly, 12-year career mostly with St. Louis, essentially followed Marshall Faulk. Actually, he still holds, Jackson does, the St. Louis Rams, or the Rams, career rushing record. He was picked at second team All-Pro twice. Okay, Taylor once. Taylor made one Pro Bowl. Jackson made three. In 12 seasons, Jackson had 8 1,000 rush seasons. That's more than Taylor had. If you look at their best seasons for Jackson, that was 2006. Okay, that's 1,528 yards, 13 rush TDs. And hold your breath for a second, guys. 90 receptions, 806 yards, and 3 TDs receiving. Okay. If you look at the best year that Frank Taylor had, 2003, similar yardage, 1,572, 6 touchdowns, 48 receptions. So there's some parallels there, but not enough that puts one in the list of semifinalists and leaves this guy out. Career-wise, Jackson's currently sits 18th in rushing attempts, 18th with yardage, 11-4, 38, and 34th in career touchdowns at 69. So one of the distinctions people might make is to say, well, Fred Taylor has more career rushing yards, if we think that is a measure. It is an important one. It's probably not the only one, obviously, because we're going to talk about the value of that on its own. But, Taylor only has 257 more career rushing yards. So the question I'm posing is, why doesn't Steven Jackson get more credit, more consideration? If there's a cohort of players that we're looking at, their careers overlap, and they're at a stage where they should be considered by the voters, and the voters are looking for running backs from the 2000s. They've considered Eddie George, Ricky Watters' career is a bit earlier than that, and then, of course, Fred Taylor. Why aren't we getting any love from the voters for Steven Jackson? He should get some consideration and thought by the voter. Thanks.
Another unique take. It's a Canadian thing tonight, and I love it. Great job. Thank you, Paul. Next up, I believe we are going to the hater in the house who's going to talk about Jamal Lewis. The floor is yours.
Well, I guess I'm going to join the Canadians with a different take on this. And when we think about Jamal Lewis, think about Jamal Lewis from the Baltimore Ravens, and we don't really think about Jamal Lewis. We think about that defense and how dominant they were. One of the most defenses all time. And then we got Jamal Lewis, kind of playing in the background, bumping away. Jamal Lewis is a great player from the early days of the Ravens franchise. He's one of the most dominant writers at that. Jamal Lewis was a workhorse back. His 2066 yard season was second all time before Adrian Peterson broke it. It was enough for an All-Pro selection and a Pro Bowl selection. This, however, was the highest peak of his career at this moment. He would never maintain the same progress that he had in 2003. And in fact, we know that in part of that 2000 yard season, but he only eclipsed 1,000 yards. I think 2 times after that. 4 times, sorry. Um, yeah, but that was it. So, in my opinion, at the end of his career, that 10,000 yards, the touchdowns are not even close. And in my opinion, his yards per game is not high enough. So, it's my opinion that Jamal Lewis is in the Hall of Very Good, and he should not be a selection for the Hall of Fame.
Hater living up to the moniker of hater. I love it. And I'm sorry we can hate on me for a moment because apparently this is a Rockford thing. I don't know how to follow the alphabet. I skipped over Thomas Jones entirely. So my apologies to you, Jack. The floor is yours again.
Sorry about that. Yes, Thomas Jones. Thomas Jones was, and I mentioned him earlier. I thought that we had ended up leaving him out, but Thomas Jones is a really good example, and I think a lot of these guys in a lot of ways are really good examples of how just like a little different situation, a little tweak of something that has nothing to do with that person, can change whether or not they are going to can to the degree to which that matters. It's not making them a better or a worse back. It literally has nothing to do with them. You know, if Kevin Dyson was able to squeeze into the end zone and the Titans win the toss and they go down, then Steve McNair and Eddie George are Super Bowl champs. I mean, it has nothing to do with them. Or Kurt Warner isn't, another better way to put it. So Thomas Jones, yeah, we know, just a bad break. Didn't have the right situation early on. Rejuvenated in Tampa, came to the Bears. His first season with the Bears, I looked, is pretty close to the season that Warrick Dunn was given a Pro Bowl berth for as a rookie. And then 2005, he became the first Bears running back other than Walter Payton to rush for 1,300 yards. So the entire list was like Walter 9 times, Thomas Jones, which, you know, we take pretty seriously. Then the next year, obviously, was the Super Bowl year. He became the first Bears running back, believe it or not. He rushed for 100 yards in multiple playoff games. No one else has done it. 123 yards in the NFC title game, 112 yards, 7.5 yards per carry in the Super Bowl. Not enough carries. Bears lose. And he became the first, and I believe still only player to get traded immediately after running for 100 or more yards in the Super Bowl. Then he banged out killer seasons on the Jets and then in Kansas City. So that's a little frustrating bit. He doesn't have that like extra element that some of these guys have, and you can't really compare it. And that's why I wanted to look at him, because there are guys like Westbrook and Forte and Clinton Portis and McGahee, and we mentioned Amon Green at a certain point, and just, I don't know, a lot of guys who did a lot of really just great running and great careers, and they just fall short of this bar that we're at.
Thank you much, Jack. It's a high bar, right? Especially with this position and a lot of guys in this kind of like grouping, this generation. Like the bar is pretty high. Will be closing out our presentations by talking about the last 2 candidates. The first one is Fred Taylor. And in the interest of full transparency, I think Fred Taylor was a very good player. I think we have also talked about it in this group that the only reason we can really come up with, right or wrong, in terms of why he is seemingly the next running back up in terms of these guys that we're talking about, is because he is the highest on the career rushing list, which I believe he is 17th. And I look at that and I say, that's a testament to like longevity, but longevity alone does not necessarily equal greatness. Now, I will call out here, to be fair to Fred Taylor, if we compare him to, let's say, somebody like Steven Jackson. Steven Jackson had a total of like 8 seasons of 1,000 yards or more, but 5 of them were under 1,200 yards, whereas Fred Taylor had 5 seasons above 1,200 yards. If you talk about in terms of rankings of top 10 in the league in rushing yards, Fred Taylor was there 6 times. Steven Jackson was there twice. When you think about Corey Dillon was there 4 times. Sean Alexander was there twice. So it's the challenge for me a little bit with Fred Taylor is where's that like wow moment? Where are those wow seasons in his career? Like bit of a super poor man's Frank Gore in terms of some really good seasons. Like, you're a 7-time of 1,000 yards or more rushing. That's a testament to pretty good career. But you have several other guys on this list that also fall into that bucket of 7 times of 1,000 yards or more. And in the case of Steven Jackson, it's 8 times. Fred Taylor was okay in terms of his 3-down ability, but I certainly wouldn't look at him as like the best pass catcher on this list or anything close to it. I wouldn't look at him as the best like runner between the tackles. He was a well-rounded back, but I just can't make the case for him being the guy that's on the top of the list. So I guess I went the Canadian route and thought a little differently.
Kuruku.
You Canadians said it right there.
I don't know the concept. I'm sorry, as someone who's not a Canuck, I don't know the reference of that.
Maybe that helps.
Anyways.
Sorry.
Oh, can we have 5 seconds for Strange Brew?
Vinny, Bob and Doug.
Fabulous film.
Vinny,
I
go
saw
ahead.
it. Great movie. I saw it.
Okay, then Vinny, I made you watch it, and you don't know what Kuruku.
See, and this is where we knew Kirk was going to take us down the path. Give a Canadian 45 minutes, and they're going to be talking about the Strange Brew.
I'm just trying to identify weird references.
I passed the ball, and I tried to take it back. Take the ball back, please.
And let me go ahead and take the ball back to talk about Ricky Watters. Because as I think about running backs that should be next up in terms of this group, I personally look at Ricky Watters, and I think he's the one. In terms of all of the guys that we're talking about here, whether you think about the Pro Bowl or not, the reality is he does have the most Pro Bowl selections with 5. So he was a Pro Bowler 50% of his career. When you think about a guy and what he did, he was kind of that prototype West Coast offense running back. He could run between the tackles. He could make big plays happen on the outside. And he was equally as dangerous in some cases in terms of as a pass catcher, as evidenced by his work in Super Bowl 29. Like we think about Super Bowl 29 is when Steve Young got the monkey off his back, if you will. But it was also the game that Ricky Watters had 3 touchdowns, including 2 as a receiver. This is a guy the year before in his second year in the league in the divisional round against the Giants had a 5-touchdown game. 70% of his career, he had a 1,000-yard rushing season. He had 5 seasons of 1,200 or more yards, including a season of 1,400 or more. You talk about a running back, one of the key abilities is availability. Ricky Watters made every start for 7 consecutive seasons in his career from 94 to 2000. And for a guy with that type of volume and workload, it was really impressive. He led the NFL in scrimmage yards once in 96, and 2 other times he was in the top 5. He was top 5 in rushing TDs a total of 5 times. And when you look at some of the career numbers and how that plays out, he's 27th all-time in career scrimmage yards. And again, he only did that 10 seasons. 24th in career rushing yards. He's 22nd all-time in career rushing TDs. Tied for 32nd in all-time career TDs in terms of like offensive positional players. And the only non-Hall of Famers that he trails are guys like Adrian Peterson, Larry Fitzgerald, Antonio Gates, the aforementioned Sean Alexander, Ricky Watters. No offense to Sean Alexander. Ricky Watters didn't get a lot of his touchdowns in goal line situations. Frank Gore, Holmes, Lynch, Gronk, like most of those names you associate with the Hall of Fame in some way, and Ricky Watters is right there with them. So I'm thinking about a guy that had the ability to impact the game in multiple ways. Contrary to popular belief, he did have some big moments in the playoffs. He also did not spend the majority of his career in San Francisco. He only spent the first 3 years there. When I think about guys that were at the top of their peer group or near the top of their peer group, and he had a hell of a peer group during his career, Ricky Watters to me is the guy that stands out as a cut above the rest. And with that, We have talked about all 10 of the candidates. Breathe in, breathe out. Great job, everybody. What I'm going to do is just kind of open the floor, have a little bit of roundtable conversation, and maybe I want to direct us first to see like we could go through some like tiering exercise and like kind of rank in tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. And maybe we start, not to be harsh, but maybe start at the bottom, right? And does anybody have anybody, Jack, I saw you come off mute. Like,
Yeah.
does anybody have anyone that they think belongs at the bottom? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to note to listeners or the viewers and to everybody here. Again, I just wanted to reiterate kind of what the bar is. There are 6, and I've dropped these in the chat here, but for people obviously who are watching, there are 6 Hall of Fame running backs who had significant overlap at the start of Fred Taylor's career, which is not to pick on Fred Taylor, but just because that's kind of where this conversation has launched. And so like looking at that as the timeline, 98 to 2010, and I don't have to read their accomplishments. You all know what they are. Marshall Faulk, Danian Tomlinson, Edgerrin James, Curtis Martin, Jerome Bettis, Terrell Davis. You put on the other side of this Adrian Peterson, and that's 7 right there. When you start to look at like positional spread and guys who are all decade in the 1990s who haven't gotten a look yet, and start looking at the whole picture, we've got 10 running backs. We've already eliminated however many. We didn't mention Ricky Williams, another 10,000 yarder whose career was much better than people remember. So that's kind of the bar. And so I look at this from a very strict sense and try to say, are there 3 more people I feel most strongly about? Are there maybe 4 more people? That's kind of the tightness of it. And let's go with that mindset.
Will, what do you got?
Well, I like to reiterate the thing I always say when we have these conversations, which is the standards by which we're measuring this are individual, and everybody has their own. And I think running backs in particular are just fraught with peril of analyzing statistics and longevity. And yeah, there's something to be said for longevity and accumulating a lot of statistics and so on. But I'm much more about, I feel like there's standards for me personally. There is somebody that had so much wow that even in such a strong peak that you remember them, and you remember being sort of scared of what they might do to your team if you play them. You feared them when they lined up against you, right? So that's one. You might be feared them because of their explosiveness, or you feared them because they were like a player that got 5 or 6 yards seemingly every time they touched the ball, and so it made it almost impossible to shut that team down completely on offense. Or they were somebody who was so iconic in the league for so long and so tough that sort of combination of the toughness and ultra longevity and standard of high play for a long period of time, leadership, and so on. So to me, that informed my decision when I listened to these presentations about these 10 players. But the stuff like, how many all pros and Pro Bowls for running backs is just so crazy. Like it very rarely had to do with the guys who meant the most to their teams for winning football games. It was often this, the way that their players are hyped in their careers. And if their teams, if they especially were on a team that got a lot of eyeballs, sometimes there's the perception of these players. And I guess to go back to your point just now, Jack, that you're making is, in a way, there's too many running backs already in the Hall of Fame. There's too many running backs from this era that are in. There are some people.
I'm not saying there are too many.
I'm saying I kind of think that there are. I kind of believe that there are, like in terms of their relative importance to other positions in the game, especially as we start to move into this era where it becomes less and less important over the course of their careers. So this might be the last, era. I can't totally say the running backs are not that valuable, because it was still the centerpiece of most of these teams. But I kind of feel like if you weren't somebody that was had an amazing peak, had a lot of explosion, or was really sort of scary to play against, that I already feel like I said there's just so many names already on that list that are in from this era. So that was my sort of listening to those names. There were at least 6 or 7 of them that I thought to myself, great player. I don't see really the case for them, particularly in the context that I just gave.
So who would be maybe like one or two of those players, Will, that you think of? And I hate to say like the bottom here, but like when you think that's part of the exercise, right? Is to differentiate
Sure.
candidates. And like if you think of who's the person or two whose resume you feel least
Yeah,
stacks up, who would that be?
he isn't the worst of the candidates, in my opinion. But the one that stuck out to me that I remember right now is Sean Alexander. One big regular season where he was a player, offensive player of the year, I think, and was just sort of like was a player that didn't move the needle for me. And it was like they fed him the football. They build a team about trying to have ball control and a good defense, and that kind of thing works for a while. But it's always sort of revealed when it gets to playing against better teams in postseason. And I don't have a stat in front of me about what he was like versus better teams generally in his career, but it feels like he's the kind of player that it reminds me of this game once that Roddy White had where he had 170 yards catching or something like that in a game that the Falcons couldn't score. Like he got a lot of mileage out of his statistics for a lot of very little impact on the game. And I feel like Sean Alexander was a player that often had a lot of statistics, and he's probably a good fantasy player to own, but not necessarily a player that really made that team scary. They were a good team, but not necessarily about him.
Yeah, and Jack, maybe I want to kick it to you really quickly because I know you represented Sean pretty well here.
You did.
Will brings up an interesting point. I think about something I think you said before, Jack, about where did the voters change from? Some of these voters might have been who selected us Sean Alexander for an all-decade team, or some of these other running backs for an all-decade team, and then all of a sudden, like Fred Taylor has jumped ahead of that queue, right? And
it's two. It's the 2010s, the all 2000s, all decade team, second team running backs, who were Jamal Lewis and Sean Alexander. And the same people who vote for the Pro Football Hall of Fame, obviously individual changes to voting body aside, as a body, it's the same group that's voting for that as voting for the all decade team. So I would look at that and say, how is it in 2010 that Sean Alexander and Jamal Lewis, thank you, were here ahead of Fred Taylor, and now he's ahead. And the only thing that doesn't get factored in for that all-decade vote is that Fred Taylor had 2 years before that, 98, 99. He rushed for 1,955 yards, which incidentally is the difference between him not being in the 10,000-yard club and being 17th all-time and maybe a 4-time semifinals. So I'd be curious to know what that difference was.
I'll call it as I see it. They change whenever the hell they feel like it.
I'll
say it. I don't care. I don't like them.
I
think I'll ask this question. Do you think I think their views change as the game changes. So the running backs that look better in context of modern football tend to be more high. Their
could be
profile is elevated as time goes on.
Yeah, but if that was the case, then Ricky Waters. I'm sorry, I was just going to say, if that was the case, I would actually think Ricky Waters, who was a better pass catcher than Fred Taylor, right?
And I agree with you. I feel like Ricky Waters. I don't know what hurts him that he hasn't gotten recognition that way, because if the bar is the other running backs that are already in the Hall of Fame, he clearly belongs there. Now, you can make a different argument. Are there more running backs in the Hall of Fame than belong there? Yes, I would say. So but if you're using that as a bar, it's a mystery why Ricky Waters.
I would take him over Jerome Bettis.
Yeah, I would too. I would take him over Curtis Martin.
Yeah, so just really quickly, I want to make sure we get maybe a couple of these guys flushed out so we can start narrowing in. Does anybody have anybody that they view as the bottom one or two? Let's see if we can start picking off a couple. Go ahead, Vinny.
There's, as someone who likes large classes, there's many people I really bang the drum for and advocate.
Who's the one or two, Vinny?
But there's two that I never say ever. I never say Thomas Jones for one. I don't think I've ever seen a case for Thomas Jones in the first place.
Okay.
And honestly, I'm not really that crazy on did anyone mention Warwick Dunn? Because I'm early.
No, we changed him. We swapped him out for Thomas Jones.
Yeah, I'm not really. And as for the second guy, I guess maybe maybe Jamal Lewis because it was a little bit, but I can go either way. Thomas Jones, I'm definitely no way. But Lewis, I could be swayed, but yeah, those would be my two, I would say.
Okay, wait, that's very interesting. Real quick, how many people would have Jamal Lewis on the other side? When you think about the 2 or 3 who you're like leaning most toward, does anyone have Jamal Lewis in that 2 to 3? I do.
Wow.
I don't.
I don't see that. I'm sorry.
When you say the 2 to 3, you mean like at the top 2 or 3 candidates?
Yeah, when I think about the list and who interests me, he's up there. Sometimes he's
Jamal
lower. Sometimes he's like 5, but yeah.
I don't know.
Just curious. No one else. That's fine.
Yeah, no. I was gonna say, like you would not think of Thomas Jones in that same category. I know, like you did a good job of representing him, Jack, right? But he was just illustrative. Does everybody agree? Like Thomas Jones kind of falls into that lowest of the tiers of what we're talking about?
Yes. Unfortunately, yes. I mean, he had his moments. There's no question about it, Jeff. We have been able to see some really good moments of Thomas Jones. If only Ron Turner had decided to give him the ball more, maybe there would have been some bling in the Windy City as opposed to a rusted 85 trophy. But I'm not going to totally divulge and get upset about it. But as good as a running back as he is, he's just not the cream of the crop kind of guy. So I would agree to put him at the bottom. But when you think of like Jamal Lewis, he did win the Super Bowl as a rookie. He did rush for over 2,000 yards. But again, as good as he is, I'm just not sure. Like, if I'm willing to vault him like I'm willing to vault for Ricky Waters. Now, Ricky Waters definitely needs to be in. Because the reason he probably gets overshadowed is because who he played with. You got Steve Young, you have Jerry Rice, you have a lot of good players on that San Francisco team that got a lot more credit than what Ricky Waters did. And Ricky had a lot to do with that Super Bowl run. Although people forget that particular year, the 49ers, not only did they have a good team and Dion came into play, but they had a pretty darn good draft class that was brought in, including their kicker of all people. They brought in a kicker that knew how to kick the ball. In this day and age, you can't find people like what Doug O'Brien did for that team. Doug Bryan, excuse me, forgive me for mispronouncing his name. Of course, it's Justin Tucker, but that was a darn good pick. That was a darn good class by the 49ers.
So are you saying
Ricky Waters just gets out of it?
Sorry, Shravan, I was going to check really quickly. Are you saying you feel Jamal Lewis belongs in the same tier as Thomas Jones? I want to make sure.
Yes, I would have to say that, yes.
How do some others feel about that?
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I'd rather have Matt Forte over Thomas Jones because I thought Matt Forte
was not here. So
he's not.
Yeah, that's the thing.
We're talking about Jamal Lewis, though.
Yeah,
do people agree with me that Jamal Lewis is not in that upper tier level running backs?
No, he reminds me a lot of like how Chris Johnson is. Like, he has a 2,000-yard season, but not really as much.
On 387 carries.
Great year, but
great year, great back.
Kudos to him for taking 387 carries and not dying.
Yeah, and I just want to point out to anyone watching, listening, I think that I can speak for everyone here, and we all represent different fan bases. Any one of these guys, if that was our running back for 5 years in their peak, we would be thrilled. Right? I mean, like, would we not?
Yeah, and I feel like we need to make that very, very clear to people because I'll be honest, someone who goes to a lot of these conversations is either if you're not first, you're last, Ricky Bobby situation. And usually those that are on the outside looking in are usually trashed by their fan bases. We have to make that very, very clear. We have to make that
also got to make like we're trying to simulate the voting process, right? And trying to like show how we could see like the voting process goes. Like,
I'm Canadian. I gotta like put the nice card out there. Now I've done it once. I don't have to do it again.
He said sorry.
Sorry.
Does anybody else view Jamal Lewis as like towards the bottom, or does somebody else along with Jack feel that Jamal Lewis is higher up?
Here, let me explain how I view him, because I don't think any of these are perfect candidates, and therefore I just look at things that pop off the page or popped off my experience of watching them. And I think that Sean Alexander, I don't care how you cut it, I don't care how many were 1 yard touchdowns, I don't care who he was running behind, he ran for 100 touchdowns. That is a massive, massive number. It's not to be ignored. Priest Holmes, for 3 years, you watched him and you were like, no one could play this position any better than Priest Holmes. And it was only 3 years or 3.5, but that to me is like one of those experiential things that jumps off the page. And his touchdowns in games started. I mean, we like know what Priest Holmes did. Rushing title. He's sort of like Barry Bonds, where Barry Bonds went and won the home run title and then the batting title. And Priest Holmes was like rush title and then no touchdowns, and now a record touchdowns. To me, Jamal Lewis being the like offensive force on a team that had no offense, that 5 consecutive weeks was without an offensive touchdown, that had a defense so strong that they told the offensive coordinator, just get us 7. So to me, Jamal Lewis doing that his rookie year and being like the one guy who you're going to like consistently count on in the same exact way was very pertinent, jumps off the page. Ricky Waters, I just loved the way that he played. I loved the duality of his game. I thought he could star with anybody. Jeff pointed out something that I hadn't even thought of, and I don't know how many people have. We think of him as San Francisco, and that kind of cuts against him in some respects. He was only there 3 years. Then he was in Philly 3 years, and then he was in Seattle 4 years, and he had 1,000-yard seasons everywhere he went.
I think that
And
hurts, Jeff.
just the dynamics of what he could do in the passing game, going up the seam. I mean, he wasn't quite Marshall Faulk, but man, I mean, you could really rely on him. And Marshall Faulk was still coming along, you know, when Ricky Waters won a Super Bowl, Marshall Faulk's rookie year. And then I just love Eddie George. And that's, so what I'm saying is that's like how I'm looking at it. I don't think anybody here has a perfect resume. And it's just a question of like, what, like one little lightning bolt area like got you most excited, whether it's when you watched him, a certain game, a certain season, a certain stat, whatever it is.
I would look at this list when I would look at the next 2. Like if I was thinking of out of the 10 we've discussed, let's say Thomas Jones is 10. The next 2 that I would look at, honestly, would be in some order Eddie George and Steven Jackson. And I think of Eddie George and I say, yes, he had some good numbers, but he was an incredibly efficient running back, right? Like this was a guy that had some real challenges with the 4 yards per carry barrier. And you could say, well, that was because he was a high volume back. He was. But to me, I view Eddie George as like an example of a guy that got quite a bit of media attention. And some of it was because of his play, but some of it was, you know, the way he carried himself, the way he presented himself. You know, early on in his career, obviously the Titans go to the Super Bowl.
Ohio State too, don't forget that.
Yeah, from the Ohio State University, right? But when you look at some of his numbers in relation to his peers, I just don't know that they stand out as much as some of these other guys. And I think of Steven Jackson as a guy, you know, I used kind of like the Fred Taylor comparison, right? You know, Steven Jackson had a very solid career, but, you know, I don't see so much daylight between him and like a Thomas Jones. There's a little bit of daylight there, but it's not that much.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But I just look at Eddie George, though, the kind of that iconic figure in Tennessee at a time when they were switching from Houston to Tennessee and that whole transition. He was kind of like the guy that, along with Steve McNair, had the glamour in an offense that was not really that glamorous when you look at what Tennessee was all about. It was run the ball, run the ball. I don't want to say a team that likes to do that now, but I'm not going to go there. But the reality situation, it was a heavy running team, and it gave Jeff Fisher, of all people, credibility. People forget Jeff Fisher led that Titans team to Atlanta for that game, and he was going up against an offense that, if you really think about it, it's what we run today. The heavy, spread out wide, get the receivers the ball, just make a play on a spread attack. It was basically old school versus new school in Atlanta. And the Titans came close. But when you think of what the Titans were, even in the 2000s, early 2000s, they were a physical group. And that man, Eddie George, was the guy that led it. Now, I would want him in the Hall of Fame, but I agree with Jeff. He doesn't have as much of a separation as like a Ricky Waters. If Waters does not get in, I don't understand it because the numbers speak for themselves. But Eddie George, in my mind, he deserves to at least be considered in that upper tier. If he's not, he's not. But I would take him. I'd put him in the hall.
I just look at like the fact that I think like 70% of his career, if not more, he averaged less than 4 yards per carry.
Yeah,
like it's some
that's an
all
issue.
stock type of numbers with a little more volume, right? Jack, I'm sorry, did I jump over you? Were you going to say something, Jack? No, okay. Anybody else? Like, I know I threw out something there kind of provocative in terms of Eddie George and Steven Jackson. I don't want to automatically sway the group, but I'm trying to lead us to like start funneling through some of these guys. Does everybody agree or disagree with?
I'm wondering if maybe we should sort of like work our way towards positioning the one running back that we want the most.
You want to go top down? We can absolutely go top down.
Yeah, we could do that. And again, just like 10 people that we all respect. But yeah, I think that's a great idea. Well,
so I wonder, like, just for a second, we bounced around several of these names, but there was one name that we haven't really talked more about since it was presented. And I'm just kind of curious, like Jeff saying before, how people feel about this candidate and kind of where he sits, and that's Tiki Barber. Now, Vinny already made the case, so we don't need to hear again from Vinny. But I'm curious how others view him. I find him sort of in the middle, so I'm just kind of curious as to whether people see him kind of, bottom tier, middle tier. We haven't really talked much about him. We mentioned many of the others in the last few minutes. Any thoughts on him?
That's a good one.
I've got one. I'm sorry, I was just going to say really quickly. I think he's like somebody fact check me here. I think he's like 15th all time in career scrimmage yards.
Yeah, he's around there. He's third all time. Like I said, in terms of all,
Vinny. That just yes, keep it moving.
That's correct.
So I'm thinking about when you talk about the 10 seasons that he played, right? A little bit of unfortunate timing of the retire the year before the team wins the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Well,
when you talk,
but I think that's part of it. If I could,
sure.
We're talking about. Sorry. Go. You're gonna say no. Okay. We're talking about Hall of Fame, right? And when we look at some of these people, we're talking about all these amount of yards, touchdowns, this, that, the other thing. Eventually, we're going to be doing a deep dive on Marshawn Lynch, and sometimes when that happens, Marshawn Lynch, his biggest play is the one that never happened, the one where Pete Carroll didn't give him the ball when that didn't. I think we all thought he was going to get the ball for that Super Bowl, right?
Yeah, I thought so. Though my uncle thought it was going to be a pass, and my uncle was correct.
Right. But what's Tiki's biggest thing? It's like, I'm going to retire. You know what? I'm retiring, and Eli sucks, and they're not going to win without me. He didn't quite say it like that, but
yeah, I'll tell you, as someone who was there and experienced that, there was some ill will towards him and the Giants as a result, and the media around New York was kind of a little against him. I mean, obviously it's patched up a bit because he's now on SNY. He does his own show and also on.
But it still happened, Ben.
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah.
So
they still hold that against him.
He went out. So he trashed the team, and then New York wins the Super Bowl after he's gone. I don't know how the voters are thinking. I know that's how I think. Well, when I'm looking at a lot of these people here, so like we're going to do again, like I said, a deep dive on Lynch. Lynch to me was more money, even though if we look at stat wise, it's not all that much different than who we're talking about.
I think it's also with Marshawn Lynch. A lot of his was also he was very much in the public eye. I find with a lot of these people that the public eye also really helps. Some people that I like tend to not be like that. Though I think in some instances, the lack of attention probably helps him. Like in a case like Fred Taylor, I think him being in Jacksonville, in a way, probably helps him. I think with New York, it hurts him because a lot of people in New York still have a massive, massive, massive grudge against Tiki Barber. Not to mention they also hold his personal life against him.
But what do we think?
Yeah, like it doesn't matter what the others think. I want to make sure we address Paul's question. Like, where do we view him as a candidate ourselves?
That's what I think. When I think of Tiki Barber, my first thought is, quit a year earlier than you should have, and you went all in on your own career, which is great. I think that's fantastic. I think a lot of players, I wish they would quit early. The
But
narrative
those
on
last
him,
5 years of his career were really outstanding. Like if you
Oh,
look
he
at
was
those numbers, they're
great.
hard. They're
like
hard to.
during that.
of course it was.
Hold on.
Can I ask a question about Tiki Barber? Was
Yeah.
Tiki Barber a superstar?
In New York, he was.
And I'm not talking about in
No.
New York. I'm talking about in the NFL. Was Tiki Barber?
I wouldn't
No.
consider him a superstar.
No.
I mean, the
Was
fact
Priest
that
Holmes a superstar?
well,
For a
he
few
was
years,
like the
yes.
best. He was
He
the
had
best
some
running back
moments,
during
no
his time.
doubt.
He, I would.
But what do we define as a superstar, right? So
I-
so Bud Light, for example, they're going all in trying to like resurrect their brand, so they're getting Travis Kelce because Travis Kelce is a superstar. That's a superstar. Were any of these guys a superstar on a Kelce level? I guess
no,
not.
I don't think any of them were. No, none of them came close to Travis
Nah.
Kelce.
Nah, Travis is transcendent.
Yeah, but-
Travis hosted SNL.
Okay.
None of these guys can say
We're
that.
we're swirling a little bit away. I still think from the question that Paul
Yeah,
asked.
Sorry.
I'm gonna say-
sorry.
No, you're okay. So, Will, quick question.
This is
Do you
what
think? Go ahead, Jack.
this is what I'll say. This is what I'll say on Tiki Barber. I think we've laid it out all pretty well. He had an incredible 2005 and had the misfortune of arguably being the second best running back in his own city. Curtis Martin had arguably a better season. And
Yeah.
that's, that can be difficult. We talk about that all the time in sports. So that can be a problem. But yeah, I mean, his final 5 seasons were incredible. I think that, again, the issue here is that with all of these guys, you're looking for that one thing. And I think Tiki Barber was an awesome running back. And
He was. I can attest to that. He was.
yards,
He really
yards
was.
per carry.
Very good.
What was it? It was second or third or fourth. He was top 5 in yards per carry among 10,000-yard rushers.
He's third all time.
Third all time. You mean the
Third all time.
right? Which meaning he was low in attempts compared to all the 10,000
Oh,
guys. Yeah, that's incredible. And 3 straight 2,000-yard overall seasons, 2 straight years leading the NFL in yards per scrimmage. I mean, those kind of yardage things over that short period of time, probably even accounting maybe for his size as well, is like crazy impressive. So I don't know. I mean, like if someone like really came to bat, like if Brian were here, Brian would be going all in on Tiki Barber and explaining to us all exactly what we missed and didn't see in Tiki Barber. Appreciate you, Brian. And if he were here, he'd be doing that. And maybe if someone has a feeling like that, but I think otherwise, for me, nothing else pops up and he's somewhere in the middle. I could be sold, but I don't feel particularly strong about him. And, I don't think I don't think we can conclusively say, obviously, if they went to and had the success that they had in Super Bowl 42, because Tiki Barber they were all, coalescing
But-
around the departure.
But we say that about Cam Newton, right? If Cam Newton won the Super Bowl and didn't we're going to be talking about quarterbacks at some point. Cam Newton is more known for his press conference than anything he ever did.
Well, I just think that's stupid. The guy has 75 rushing touchdowns.
I agree with
Yeah,
you.
absolutely.
Influenced the nation, different kind of. Anyways,
You're right,
what I'm
but
saying is that a lot of these guys who we're talking about, who are giving a little bit of an edge to, are people who happened to play in a Super Bowl. They were a key reason why their team was in the Super Bowl. They were in an offensively deficient system on a defensive heavy team. Thomas Jones, Eddie George, and Jamal Lewis. And they get like a little extra. Corey Dillon, even in a way, because those early Patriots teams, they weren't like, airbusters.
And Sean Alexander would fall in that category.
And Sean Alexander, absolutely.
Exactly.
Thank you.
I
So-
agree with Jack. The Patriots
Tiki Barber just has the
they weren't throwing the ball all the time.
So Tiki Barber just has the misfortune here of not having that element, which is like an element for what we just said, 5 of these guys. That's just bad breaks.
So
I would say when it
let
comes-
me reel us in here.
Go ahead.
I think we're trying to start we haven't gotten to who does everybody think is the top one? And I want to ask it slightly different in terms of who would you look at this list and say is the top guy, and want everybody to type it in the chat if we can. Thank you, Jack. Who is your top guy that is not the one that you presented? So if we just sat there and said,
Top 3.
so it can't be one we presented.
Yeah,
Yeah.
trying to get like, unless you want to say like, let's do our top three, and it could include the one to present because you might have presented somebody you don't think belongs in the top three.
That's fine.
Like I'll say this personally. If I was
Vote.
talking about Hall,
Vote. Vote.
I'm not. I'm talking about just Tiki Barber for this. In terms of Hall of Fame stuff or who I want, Tiki Barber is not only just like one for running backs. He'd be a part of my inaugural personal Hall of Fame, but he would not be someone I would say is in my top three in terms of the ones here.
Are you going to type it in the chat, sir?
I already wrote it down. Who my number one is?
Oh, I thought we were saying we were going.
Sorry, are we doing three or one? Because I did three.
Top three. Top three.
Okay, all right. Look
So
at me
I
following
already
instructions.
I already went ahead and put one in, and I'm actually not going to change that.
Okay.
I'm actually going to say that he is the only one among this group who I think is at a tier above all of the rest. And the issue is we've kind of talked about a little bit here in other forums. The rest of these are all kind of grouped together in my mind. There's a lot of overlap. There's some similarities. There's flaws for their cases. And if you think about how these guys play, the impact, when you saw them play, did you say that's a Hall of Famer? And we made good arguments for all these guys because they all have something, right? They're all in that kind of discussion. But I'm pretty happy and quite satisfied just to say Ricky Waters and leave it at that personally.
What's funny, Paul, is I just did the exact same thing. Like I vote up to three, but I'm sorry. Like there's some other good cases that were made. Yeah, there's some other good cases that I heard today, right? Like I use Jack's example for Sean Alexander. It's like if I was Sean Alexander, I'd be really proud of the case that he presented. I hear Chris talking about Priest Holmes, like that 3.5 years that Priest Holmes had. My God, wow. Yeah. I wish it was 5.5 years because he'd already been in camp 5-7 years ago. Mm-hmm. But like when I think about the guy to me that has the most differentiation, to me at least, it's Ricky Waters. Mm-hmm.
I have my list there, but I should mention that my top two are pretty easy. Thirds are very, very close above the two others, and I kind of view two of them very similarly.
So let me run this down.
Hey, by the way, can I just say about just because we've mentioned this short number of years with Priest Holmes, that Priest Holmes had 1,000-yard season in Baltimore in his first season playing. So he basically had 4 actual 1,000-yard seasons, and then 2 other seasons that basically had half 1,000 yards in the 2 half seasons. So that is pretty much. I mean, like I wrote down in the chat, the Terrell Davis wing for Priest Holmes, because if Terrell Davis is a Hall of Famer, which is that's a benchmark that would be at the bottom for the shortness of his shortness of career and a short peak. Priest Holmes is definitely a Hall of Famer. I mean, he's arguably a better player than Terrell Davis in almost everything.
I will just say one thing. Priest Holmes doesn't have a Super Bowl ring.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
Yes, he does. He in 2000.
That's right. He was there with
I'm sorry. I forgot.
I think you mean now as the main back.
That's the main guy. That's the main character.
The main character was Mario. He's Mario and Priest Holmes.
Someone's collecting all this, right?
I'm trying to write this down as everybody is.
All right, so this is where I get to do my plugs.
Yes, perfect.
I love plugging.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you love pegging.
Just keep it nice, people. Stay on track, on target.
Sorry.
All right.
Come on, Kurt.
So let me tell you the things I like to plug, and some of these people have helped me plug.
The Bucknerverse. Do it.
Thank you. All right. So
more stable than DC.
If you're watching this, and all the people here are part of a group that, and hopefully a little bit, we're going to add some more to it. We're doing what's called the Pro Football Hall of Fame Revisited, where basically I have asked people, hey, and Jack's a big part of that. So thank you very much for everything you're doing on that, Jack. And Vinny too is the head of the senior committee. He is the senior committee, by the way. So, because who else? If the Pro Football Hall of Fame started in 1946, would it be different? and that's what we're looking at. So all the people here are part of a voting body, along with some other people. And if you want to be part of that, please DM any one of us, because we're ready for that, and we want to sort of like do that. Some of the other things in, hold on, I have a whole thing for this. The Bucknerverse. Huh?
Nah.
Bucknerverse. Well, I try. Anywho, Vinny is part of that. Vinny does a great show for us called Vinny Makes the Hall of Fame Case for ... And we never know. Well, no, because it changes all the time, right?
Of course.
And yeah, it's been a really good one. The last one that's going to be going up soon is on Don Cherry, the great Canadian. He did that as a tribute to me. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. And it is reaching people. So before I start doing some other plugging, insert joke there. Vin, tell us who reached out to you because of one of your shows.
Well, first off, before I say that, I should mention it because I wasn't able to do it last time. I did that on my dad's 57th birthday, and tonight, while I'm doing the show, where I'm celebrating my mom's 56th birthday. So, happy birthday, mom, and happy belated happy birthday, dad, and also,
I'm sure your mom will appreciate you putting her age out into the bucket.
Also, yeah, she doesn't mind. Also, I want to say thank you guys for having me on for this one, because rest in peace, Joe Kelly. You meant a lot to me, and you always be part of our family. So Godspeed to you. You meant a lot to a lot of us. So now the upcoming one I'm going to be doing is the pioneer of baseball in Japan, Horace Wilson. He is a very unique case that I thought of personally for baseball. He's one that I thought of for like as like an interest of like Japan. It's someone I thought of like.
I was going to say though, before we get, because that's going to be great, but a couple of your shows though, people who were related to the people that you did have reached out to you.
Oh yes, there are a couple I should mention. First off,
yeah,
I both of them for the two basketball players do, and as you all know, I mostly do contributors, and if I ever do players, they're usually ones that mean a lot to me, or if they played a very, very, very long time ago. And the two that did reach out to me were the relatives. I think it was like the grandson of Leroy Edwards. His name was Dan Edwards. He said, "Thank you, Vin, so much." And that was on YouTube. And the other one that reached out to me was Matt Zaslavsky's son, Jeff Zaslavsky. Yeah, Jeff, you're not the only one. He reached out to me on Facebook, friended me, and he actually lives not too far away. He lives in Wantagh. He lives about 25, 30 minutes away. Eventually, I don't know when, we do want to try to have a time when we meet up in person. And if we're able to, I'm going to see if Jeff could come on and speak for an interview here, if it's possible.
Yeah.
Because we were trying to do it before, but he couldn't because his daughter was graduating from Binghamton. So yeah, I want to say thanks to Dan and Jeff for contacting me, and I'm very happy I was able to talk about the case of your father or grandfather, or in some cases great grandfathers, because these are two men whose legacies to the sport are almost forgotten by so many. But if you look at their numbers and how well they were viewed by their peers, they should have been in ages ago. And I don't know why they aren't in, but whatever happens,
well, that's why you love the show.
I'll always be rooting for them. And make sure you look on notthehalloffame.com and also listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or YouTube to listen to what I have to say. Or in particular, you get to see my beautiful face.
We have
as
a
well
count.
As I give those cases.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt all the plugging that's going on here. This is a Canadian.
I have more plugs later, but okay.
Oh, yeah, we do have a count. We do have a count. And what's interesting is I was looking at the votes. Told everybody you could vote up to your top 3, right? And everybody voted. And we had 5 players, it looks like, here received a vote based off of my count. Tied for 4th place, if you will, with 1 vote apiece, was Eddie George and Corey Dillon. So if I'm technically thinking right now about who we would be establishing as like our tiers, right? is like you had two guys that got one vote each. That kind of feels like maybe that's your tier 3, and the other guys that didn't get any votes are maybe the tier 4. Tied for second with 5 votes apiece. Drum roll, please. You probably already know. Sean Alexander and Priest Holmes. And your runaway winner, who got a vote from every single person here, so I think this is the one we could feel like is the consensus right now, right, is Ricky Waters.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is also kind of timely
Yep.
because he only has a few years left as a modern candidate, right?
Yeah.
I think is it like 3 years left as a modern candidate? It's either 2 or 3.
He
around
got
there.
3 left. Yeah, he got 3 left.
3 left. Okay, thank you. So I want to float this out here to the group really quickly. It feels like Ricky Waters is our clear top back here.
Yeah, definitely.
Obviously, yeah.
I was going to ask, do we have any interest like debating Alexander and Priest Holmes to see who we would say is like second and who would be third?
We
Because
could
right
do
now we
that.
kind of have them grouped together.
We could, but should we focus our efforts on Ricky?
Well, our effort should be Ricky, and to be fair, Kirk, I think we already kind of have, in a way, Alexander ahead of Holmes because we've had Sean Alexander ahead of Holmes in like the past.
That's a good call.
That's true.
That's why.
Go ahead, Will.
I'm not going. I'm not. I mean, here's the thing. I'll just make my case for why I'm so down on Sean Alexander. It's just I have this thing. The players that played during my era, especially a player, that I got to see a lot of, because some of these players obviously they play in some markets and on some teams we don't see them that much. But it's players that you hated because they always hurt your team. Like everybody hates Tom Brady because he's the greatest, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
I hated Cliff Branch. I told him that in person. That's my famous Cliff Branch story. When I met him, I was like, I hated you. He was like, Steelers fan? I was like, yeah. so it's a sign of respect, right? So love or hate. But the players that I'm sort of like was more indifferent about, I feel like it says something about them that like, okay, yes, Sean Alexander, 28 touchdowns in a single season, no matter how much they're feeding you the ball is amazing. So his 2005 season, if I were ranking seasons for running backs, I would put it very high up there. He was great that year. But I'm telling you that guy, speaking as a fan of not only football, but of my team, when I tuned in and watched Seattle play in that era, I neither was excited about getting to watch him play like I would have been for some of the players that I loved around the league that I really admired, nor was I fearful that somehow he was, how are we going to stop Sean Alexander? It was never a thought that entered my mind. So,
and I think you just explained why Ricky Waters had 9 votes. Because Sean Alexander and Priest Holmes, I would imagine, are getting a lot of first and second place votes, and other people didn't have them in their 3 at all. Ricky Waters probably wasn't a lot of people's number 1, but everyone got to the end of 2 and we're like, oh, I can't have the 3 without Ricky Waters.
Yeah.
But yet, hold on. Yet Fred Taylor is the one, right? If we think about like what's the interesting call out here, if we talk about this process that we just went through, we landed with Ricky Waters as being like the top 1. Sean Alexander, Priest Holmes are kind of like tier 2. Corey Dillon, Eddie George each got a vote, so we're calling them for now tier 3. Tiki Barber didn't get a vote. Steven Jackson, Thomas Jones, Jamal Lewis, and Fred Taylor didn't get a single vote. So we've diverged quite a bit from like the past few years of what the Hall of Fame process is, and I'm just wondering, like, what does that say to us in terms of this process? Like,
well, here's the question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, I'm just sort of like wondering because, like, I think I speak for a lot of us here, or maybe I don't. When Fred Taylor got his first semifinalist, I think a lot of us were going like, "Eh?"
Yeah.
And then he got it again. He's 3-time at this point, right? No.
Yeah, he's been a
3 or 4.
thing of like 3-4 times. I'm also looking at I don't know how many of you guys look at like Pro Football References Hall of Fame monitor. All the 3 guys we mentioned, Sean Alexander, Priest Holmes, and Ricky Waters, they're all way ahead of Fred Taylor. There's only 2 other guys that are Steven Jackson, Corey Dillon, and Eddie George are below Fred Taylor, but Jamal Lewis and Warwick Dunn, who we didn't even mention here, are ahead of Fred Taylor in Hall of Fame.
But it's so interesting to me because, like, Fred Taylor, it's not like we're talking about a team like Pittsburgh, Dallas, Chicago, New England that has this great tradition. Jacksonville?
Well, if anything, though, there could be a piece of it maybe hurt him playing in Jacksonville when you think about pullouts potentially. But when you start looking at the numbers, yeah, well, hold on. What I'm saying is when you start looking at the numbers, he doesn't really stand out as much against his peers as like the Twitter rage machine might suggest from him or others, right? It's one of those things like this is a good player. We're not saying Fred Taylor wasn't good, but when I look at even like Sean Alexander, Priest Holmes, like if you told me I had to put two other guys on this list in the Hall of Fame, it probably would be them because I look at like that sustained peak period for a few years where they were phenomenal. Fred Taylor was good, but he never had that. He never like blew me away when I watched him as opposed to Priest Holmes, Sean Alexander. Like I felt differently about them, right? Like Fred Taylor didn't quite meet that eyeball test and his numbers are good, but if you don't factor in the career rushing yards, like you're looking at a good back, not a Hall of Famer. I'm sorry.
The thing is, he's not like so much farther ahead of those guys who he's behind. And he's only ahead of those guys because we're already removing Frank Gore and Adrian Peterson. So you already have two more guys who set a bar for rushing yards. Adrian Peterson in seasons and career, Frank Gore in a career. And so you've got those two guys ahead of him. I think also what I like about us all playing up with Ricky Watters is I feel like a lot of it with Ricky Watters is that like we just kind of liked how he played and liked how much he did it year after year, the three different systems. And that's my read on this because we haven't really talked about like, oh, there's this one Ricky Watters stat that we're all, united behind, or there's this one Ricky Watters season, or there's this one Ricky Watt, there's nothing really like that. I mean, maybe that's Super Bowl, but again, like Jeff said, like he scored 3 touchdowns, Jerry Rice scored 3 touchdowns. I mean, so it's not like he was even the only person to do it in that game. He was awesome, but there's not that like one thing. And so to me, what it says is that like we also all just take into account that like we saw Ricky Watters on the field, he was all over the place. He was running the ball, catching out of the backfield, he was running down the seam, he was playing different systems, he was, starring on teams, I think Chris said, like, with Young and Rice and John Taylor and Brent Jones, a lot of names, and Ricky Watters was right there, feeling like, okay, this guy can just do it with them and did it in Philly and did it in Seattle. And to that, it's like, if voters are honestly looking at Fred Taylor and doing a full reevaluation from like an experiential standpoint and saying, you know what, he really fits in. If they're doing what Brian does, then fine. If they're just looking at that yardage list, then that feels weird. But if they are just looking at like, oh, this was a guy who we feel like was a great player, that's the same sort of process, if that's what they're doing, that we just came to with Ricky Watters. So I feel like that adds a little bit of validity to this idea that like, nobody's like down on anybody. We just like watch Ricky Watters and we're like, this guy has something else.
Well, it's interesting.
We all have our favorites.
Sure.
Yeah. I was just going to say really quickly, this also speaks to the value of the conversation, right? And one of the things to call out about the Hall of Fame process is, I'm not even going to try and pass Jefferson on, but there is a reality of, until we get to the finalist round for these modern candidates, there's no like formalized discussion. I'm sure there's some of the offline stuff and there's like some networking connection, but sometimes the cases for certain guys play better in the room when you're actually in front of a larger audience, right? And I think about like we had the chance to talk about Ricky Watters here, for example, and kind of flesh out his case a little bit. And we got to a really good place, right? Like we were able to establish a differentiation. But he's also a guy that I think requires a little bit of context. Was it you, Will, that said earlier about the game kind of changes and the Hall of Fame approach may change a little bit?
Sure.
But for some of these guys, and I think Roger Craig in some ways fell victim to this years ago, right? Is that the Hall of Fame doesn't always give the right weight to those guys that were true like dual threat running backs. It will do it some. Like if it's a Marshall Faulk type, they will do it. If it's a Thurman Thomas type back, they'll do that. But for a guy like Ricky Watters, he doesn't seem to get that credibility, that same recognition for it because maybe he didn't have the 900 or 1,000 yard receiving season. no, he was just a consistent weapon out of the backfield on all three downs. This is fantastic.
So I think one of the things I noticed
go
through
ahead,
this
Chris.
conversation here tonight is a lot of these guys we were talking about, they really had that 1 or 2 seasons where they really stood out. They had, 1,800, 2,000 yards, Jamal Lewis, MVP, Sean Alexander, Offensive Player of the Year. Fred Taylor had one season where he led the league in yards per game. All his other seasons, he was a good back, but no season that really just jumped out like some of these other players did. And kind of looking at his career against some of these other players, especially like a Ricky Waters, I wonder if they're just trying to push a Jacksonville player because Jacksonville up until Baselli didn't have anybody.
It's a possibility, right? Like it could happen. Anybody else? Anybody else with any like final thoughts here? Because I think
Can I just
we're
say
to wrap up
something
things.
about Ricky Waters here? The
Sure.
thing about Ricky Waters is, it's like we already said, he's consistently good no matter where he was, San Francisco, the Eagles, and even in Seattle at the end.
Mhm.
So, he kind of has it all together, whereas the rest of these running backs, it's one here, there, but Ricky Waters is good all the time.
There was a consistency there, and I think to your point, Peter, there's a piece of he gets so closely associated with San Francisco where he spent exactly 30% of his career. He spent more of his time in the other places, right? Like, but he always gets associated with those first 3 years in San Francisco. So this was fantastic. We got to, sounds like a group that we generally feel pretty good about, and we certainly got to our top guy that we feel really good about, which is interesting to the point, like you said, the past few years in the committee, we've gotten Sean Alexander, and like our Hall of Fame discussion has gotten to like the semifinal round, and Ricky Waters hasn't. And we come into this discussion today, and Ricky Waters is a clear one.
Well, focus, buddy.
Yeah, I know, right?
You even started to like nudge me a little on Sean Alexander, but don't tell anybody.
I'll say this also as a personal experience of Sean Alexander. When I got my PS2 for Christmas back in like 2006, after I played the movie version of Cars, the second game I played was Madden 06, and was 06 or 07, whatever one it was, and who was on the cover? Mr. Sean Alexander was right there. So I had personal experience of Sean Alexander even when I was younger. So
and on
that note, I think it is time to formally wrap this up, Kurt. And turn it to you.
Yeah,
Any last questions? No, in all seriousness, less than 2 hours.
I have more plugs. I have to do more plugging before we end.
You would. I'm gonna light the cigar. Plug away.
All right. Well, Will, as you're sort of like coming up here, Will's been a part of my plugging.
Oh, Will, you into this as well?
Bucknerverse, yes. The final episode of this. How the hell was this? This go number one? Will, I don't know if you've noticed this. So this has now gone up on the Bucknerverse.
Oh no, I hadn't. I was wondering when it's happening. I did notice an uptick in my social media rating.
Well, it's up where we look at how the hell did this become number one? It's the finale, and Will was a special guest for that. And we looked at every number one hit from the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack.
Never again.
Right, okay, right now Vinny's trying to figure out what the hell is Saturday Night Fever, but that's okay.
Don't worry, I already know what it is. I'm explaining to Will because when they showed the list of people that got 0 votes, I hit F. Now, Will, we were explaining what does that mean? Well, as a Zoomer, whenever we hit the F key, it's a response to Call of Duty, where if you play on PC, you press the F key to pay your respects. So I'm paying my respects to the people that got 0 votes. So
now I understand everything. Okay.
Yes, it's a meme. Press F
well,
to pay your
okay,
respects.
now that the old people sort of figured it out, I can continue to plug.
Yes. Don't interrupt an old Vinny. Don't interrupt an old man when he's plugging away.
Oh man, you're so horny, Kirk. I can see it.
I'm really not. At my age, sex is like professional wrestling. And I'll explain how that sort of works. Jeff, you're gonna like this.
Yeah.
All right.
Jack has to go. See ya.
It's gonna
Take
work
care,
like
Jack. Thank you.
See you, Jack.
Was it
Hey,
something
Jack.
I said?
No, he's a busy man, I'm sure.
All right. Well,
I've
basically,
only,
it's like
I've only been up since 4 a.m. What the hell?
okay. Well, basically, it's 3 minutes. You do this, and I know what the finisher is.
Uh-huh. No, but you go into some tribal chief stuff and you start talking like during the middle of it and walking around and looking at the
I'm old school Jim Cornette. All
Yeah.
I am is talk.
Finish your plug, sir.
Appreciate that. Also, too, the final episode of This Crap Was on National Television is up, where we look at Hit Me Baby One More Time, which was a United Kingdom hit or show where old musicians sort of like came out and sort of like did a bunch of stuff. Paul, wait, did I lose Paul too? Well, Paul's gone. All right. Well, Paul is the co-host of the Retro Football Show, where we look at old classic football games. Our last one of Super Bowl VI is up. Look for Super Bowl VII that we're going to do shortly. We're going to record that. Also with Glenn Pulowski, we do the classic sports review. Coming up soon, we're going to look at roller games. So my Wednesday is looking at a football game in 1973 and roller derby from 1989. Yeah, actually,
Definitely the
that's
80s.
pretty cool.
Kirk, you're putting the man in Manitoba, but when you're from Manitoba, you got to do something.
Ta-da! But this is my job. Who figured that out? Well, the fact that I'm a trophy husband. So with that, I think we're all done here, huh?
You are the Winnipeg Wizard for a reason.
The Winnipeg Wizard, though he originally hailed from Ontario, so I guess you could say, for now at least.
Well, right now the whole thing of the Bucknerverse is now here in Manitoba. Manitoba.
That's true, and
but I've
Yeah, you're from Ontario, which is even more Canadian, really, honestly.
Are there different levels to like the Canadian dome?
Oh,
like,
yes.
Toronto is just basically
I learned
Buffalo
that now.
North. and
I have no idea. There was different levels to my Canadianism.
Canadianism.
Well,
I
like,
said
So
Canadianism.
where are the Terrence and Phillips of the world at?
Uh,
Like, are they
well,
up in the Yukon? Like, where are they?
Alberta.
well,
Saskatchewan.
I got to look at the exact like where Terrence and Philip are from.
Saskatchewan.
Saskatchewan is pretty Canadian. I was going to say like, Newfoundland or like,
Oh,
that's
yeah.
also very Canadian.
Yeah, but Newfoundland, like we don't even understand them.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, wow.
Terrence is from Toronto and Philip is from Montreal.
How do you know that?
Newfoundland, there's just
Because Terrence, I think it was because one of them had a more French kind of name. It was.
No, Terrence. Apparently,
And then,
my head does not come off.
I think our webmaster could stop the recording because I think
Yeah,
we're
you
now
think?
I think so at this point.
Yeah, I
All right,
think.
Ted, I think we're done. So
We're
with
gonna lose
that,
our viewer.
all of you, wherever you are, wherever you may be, thank you for this. Jeff, thank you so much for quarterbacking this.
Yeah.
Muchos gusto, as I think they say in your country, because aren't you being taken over? No.
Oh my God. Thank you for having me.
And for
It's
that,
good
I don't know if I can be
see you, Will.
associated with this any longer.